So it seems if you have the joy of owning an Affinity washer, you're going to get familiar with the E41 error code. So for us, the way this failed was while it was running, it just suddenly stopped, and then it had a little pause indicator in the display. So with a little research, I realized that there are error codes buried in this, but in order to find them, you have to press the start pause button and the cancel buttons at the same time, and then you should see the error code in the display. So according to my manual, the E41 code means that the control board doesn't think that the door is locked or latched. So to pursue this, I'm going to first send you actually to someone else's video. This guy, Bill Newberry, who produced a really great video on extracting the door locking mechanism out of the washer, and then he takes it apart and explains it. And part of that explanation is why there's a second coil in this unit. There's sort of a redundant lock, and he explains why that's used. So what I'm going to try and do in this video then is talk about the specific component within that door locking mechanism that failed for me, and then how I fixed that. So if you did go look at Bill's video, you'll recognize this as the door locking mechanism. It comes right out of the door of the washer. So after you remove the connectors from the door lock mechanism, you see these pins on the end. And specifically, I'm going to look at two of them with an ohm meter, just these two. So I took this video after I'd already made the fix. So you'll see that I measure a resistance of about 1.3K ohms. And that's a good reading. I think that's pretty normal, at least based on what I measured and also what I read from some other people's posts. And a bad reading then, which is what I read initially, is no connectivity, no continuity. Or on a fluke meter like this, it's OL, so it's open line. So that just means something's broken in there and needs to probably be resoldered. So again, assuming you watched Bill's video, then this is the inside of that door lock mechanism. And these are those two pins that I had just measured without opening the case. This is underneath this point here is the coil that I need to get to, because I think that's what's broken. But first I need to remove this coil here and this black plastic piece. It'll just make getting in there a little easier. And these pieces just slide straight up and out. And this is the coil that I mentioned earlier that is part of a redundant locking mechanism. So after some fiddling around, I was able to remove this mechanism, and it has that coil on the bottom. So you may recall that a coil is literally just a coil of wire, and it connects at the two ends. So these two solder joints are where the two ends connect. The wire in this coil is really, really fine, so it was hard to actually capture in the video here. But as I flip the coil over, you'll see that I try and expose exactly where the coil is disconnected. So it's not connected to that solder joint. So what you'll see here is that I just finally get a hold of the wire, and I just unravel it by one turn off the coil. You can afford one turn off this, because since the wire had broken, it really didn't reach the solder joint anymore. So then I unravel it one turn, and that gives me some slack, and then I just wind it around that solder joint, so now I can resolder it. So going back to science class for just a minute here, you may recall that a coil of wire, if you energize it, you can create an electromagnet. So that's really what the function of this is to create a magnet whereby when it's energized, it pulls that steel plate down and locks the door. And again, Bill covered that really well in his video, so I'm not going to repeat all that here. So in discussing soldering, what's called enameled wire, sometimes called magnet wire, one thing to note is that there is a coating on it. It looks like it's just bare copper, but it's not. It actually has a coating. The good news is that by simply running it through melted solder, it will remove the coating and then adhere to the copper underneath. So unfortunately, just because of these walls around the solder joint there, I wasn't able to get a good video of it. But again, it's just a matter of getting the enamel coating off the wire and then finishing the soldering. So once the coil wire was resoldered, then it was just a matter of putting it back inside the unit with all the other mechanisms, and then testing it again to make sure that, as I mentioned before, it was about 1.3K ohms. So after that proved good, then it was just a matter of snapping the cover back on, putting the connectors, inserting the connectors back in, and then reinstalling it into the door of the washer. And again, Bill's video is really good for that, so I'll just point you back to there. And I'm happy to say that the washer is working fine again. Sorry that this wasn't a more complete video, but I was in such a hurry to get the washer working again. Everything was soaking wet that I sort of hurried through it. But I did want to capture that coil, and because that's the thing that's bad. And again, as I've read on some other forums, that seems to be the predominant cause for this failure. Okay, that's all for now. I hope this helps someone with an E41 code on their Affinity washer. Take care.